So using star, by the way, I mean, I think on Wednesday, Min solved something on the whiteboard on Thursday. Actually, when was it? Where you had this, you summarized a complicated expression just calling it A. That was actually on Monday. It was Monday, okay. So it seems like long ago, but anyhow. Okay, now here's one thing. If you do these calculations, give equations names, right? And refer to those names, right? So I'm calling this, that's not a beautiful star, so let me make it a beautiful star. So that's the beautiful star. So using the beautiful star equation, we get the capital labor ratio in the traded industry is alpha T ATT divided by R 1 over 1 minus alpha T. Okay, that's just a simple transform. By the way, those who found the time to be here last week, they will know that, right? This is what we derived in the intertemporal model, right? The optimal capital stock. Depending, we had a rate of depreciation. We don't have it here for simplicity, right? But by the end of the day, this is the optimal. This comes back to us, right? Now, let me divide I think I have to, so that's, so we have these equations here. We have alpha T AT KTT to the power of alpha T minus 1 equals R, and that equals PTN alpha Tn KTN to the power of alpha n minus 1. And we have 1 minus alpha T ATT KTT to the power of alpha T divided by W T, and we divide PTN 1 minus alpha Tn KTN to the power of alpha n. All right? So a lot of stuff cancels out. Well, actually, on the right-hand side, this cancels out. And this implies that we have, well, the alpha, this cancels out, that cancels out. I forgot the 8 ANs. Sorry about that. So, but it cancels out anyway. Good. Okay, so we have, that's equivalent to saying alpha T over 1 minus alpha T 1 over KTT equals alpha n over 1 minus alpha n times 1 over KTN. Why? Well, because this is ktt to the power of alpha t minus 1. This is ktt to the power of alpha t. So these fellows here cancel out. Same thing here. Okay, so that implies that ktn equals, now, alpha n 1 minus alpha t 1 minus alpha n times ktt. Let me check my notes just to make sure I'm not messing up things. There it is. Yes, that's right. Okay, what does this buy us? Now, it buys us a relationship between the capital labor ratio in the non-traded industry and the capital labor ratio in the traded industry. Now, this, in fact, is related to the interest rate and to ATT. So what's the next step? The next step is, and let me protect this from being erased. Well, we have that equation. R equals Ptn dot dot dot. And now we're going to spell this out. R equals Ptn alpha n Atn. And now comes a big thing, right? We have alpha n 1 minus alpha t 1 minus alpha n, alpha t ATT divided by R to the power of 1 over 1 minus alpha t, and the whole thing is taken to the power of alpha n minus 1. This is KTN, remember? So we've plugged this in here, and then we have moved this in there. We're close to what we want to get, right? What we get is, we solve for Ptn, and what we get is Ptn equals R over alpha n Atn to the power of minus 1. Let me replace this one by a stronger one, right? So we're just moving everything to the left-hand side, and then we have alpha n 1 minus alpha t 1 minus alpha n, alpha t ATT divided by R to the power of 1 over 1 minus alpha t to the power of 1 minus alpha n. Now, please note, by moving this to the left-hand side, we've divided by it. Okay, now we are basically ready to harvest. Ptn equals R over alpha n 1 minus, well, alpha n 1 minus alpha t divided by alpha t 1 minus alpha n to the power of 1 minus alpha n times alpha t over R to the power of 1 minus alpha n 1 minus alpha t. That's a lot of stuff. And since I'm lazy, I call it omega. Now, then we have times alpha t to the power of 1 minus alpha n over 1 minus alpha t. And then we have 1 over alpha t n. So, last thing, and I have to bend my knees again, if you take logs, you get, well, actually, let me, log ptn equals log of omega plus 1 minus alpha n divided by 1 minus alpha t log of alpha tt minus log of alpha t n. And now last thing we do, we call this thing lowercase pt n. We call this thing lowercase omega. We call this thing lowercase a. And we call this thing lowercase atn. Oops. And now I think I'm ready to push this up. All right. Whew. That was an effort. But this is the result. And I hope I didn't screw up, but I think I didn't. No, I didn't. Right? So this is the log of the non-traded goods price. And what you see is the following. The non-traded goods price goes up if productivity in the traded goods industries goes up. I'll give you some time to copy before I comment. Okay, now this is the Balassa-Samuelson model. And it's, I mean, as I said, there's an MBA version of the Balassa-Samuelson where you have one slide where you tell the story. This is rigorous stuff. And the nice thing about being rigorous, actually being rigorous has two advantages. The first advantage is that you can check your intuition. In 60% of the cases, the math supports your intuition. In 40%, it doesn't. My favorite example is, and we had that last week, actually we had it at the beginning of this week, how does the interest rate affect savings? Intuition says savings goes up when the interest rate goes up. Math tells us, no, not necessarily. So we learn from the math. Here, basically, we're telling the same story that intuition told us. But on top of that, we get more information. And that's the second beauty of advantage of being rigorous, right? We get more. We know that there's more in it than just the simple MBA type story. Namely, now let me first, now if AT goes up, so if total factor productivity in the traded industries goes up, and there are no productivity increases in the non-traded industries, then PTN goes up, and bingo, if PTN goes up, and please note this is equal to log 1, which is 0, then the real exchange rate appreciates. Or the real exchange rate goes down, so the currency appreciates in real terms. So productivity increases in traded industries push up wages, higher wages push up prices in non-traded industries, and higher prices feed into the CPI. Now, the nice thing about the story is that you can allow for there being technological progress in the non-traded industries as well. There used to be a time when people said there's no productivity increases in non-traded industries. And the famous example of, I think, of William Baumol, an important US economist of the 1970s and early, was the string quartet. So what Baumol said is that, well, you know, in the 19th century, people played Beethoven string quartets, and they haven't become more productive in playing Beethoven string quartet. Now, this is a nice example, but A, it's wrong, and B, it's just a very small subset of what happens in services. Just to tell you why it's wrong, if you look, I mean, I don't know whether you like classical music, but if you listen to modern recordings of classical music, you know that these people are much better than the famous players some 50 years ago, right? I mean, education of classical music musicians is better than it used to be 50 years ago. And you have these famous names, and they play, I mean, Horowitz and whatever, Richter and whatever, they play classical music, but you have today, you have musicians who are better. So there's technological progress even in playing classical music. Secondly, there is technological progress in services. I mean, when you think about retail, I mean, today when you go into a shop in Germany, you collect your stuff, and then you don't go to the cashier's desk. Actually, you scan stuff, and then you pay with your credit card, right? That's technological progress. I mean, that's, you know, increases the productivity of every single person working in that shop. Now, what happens if suppose that AT goes up by the same amount as ATN? Well, it depends on 1 minus alpha n over 1 minus alpha t. So you have the same productivity increase in both industries, right? Now, it depends on this ratio. Now, this ratio has an interpretation. The interpretation is, this is greater than 1 if the N sector is relatively labor intensive and the T sector is relatively capital intensive. So if alpha T is greater than alpha N, then the capital labor ratio in the traded industry is higher than the capital labor ratio in the non-traded industry. This is something that firms choose. Now, if that's the case, then we may have technological progress in both the traded and the non-traded industries, and still we have the Balassa-Samuelson effect, right? So this model is much richer than the MBA version, and it says that you don't have to exclude technological progress in the traded industry, non-traded industries. Even if you have technological progress, increase in TFP, then you may still get the Balassa-Samuelson effect. So the interpretation is there's a real appreciation if technological progress, that is growth in parameter A, is greater in the T sector, manufacturing, than in the N sector. And the intuition is, again, technological progress in the T sector drives up wages and thus price in the N sector. Increasing N prices result in a real appreciation. So why is the Big Mac more expensive than in Basel than in Beijing? Well, because the person preparing the Big Mac in Basel gets more money, is paid better than the person preparing it in Beijing. That's the reason. It's not the Big Mac as such, it's really the difference in wages. And why is the person in Basel paid more for doing just the same thing that the person in Beijing does as well? Well, because if the person in Basel didn't get the same money as someone working in the chemicals industry, that person wouldn't fry hamburgers. Right? So that's the logic of Balassa-Samuelson. I think it's a very powerful logic. Now, interestingly, there are some countries where you see Balázs Samuelson very strongly. There's a recent paper by Doug Irwin and Maurice Obstfeld who showed that in Korea we never saw that. And they argue that in Korea the labor market is such that intersectoral labor mobility doesn't take place. So the increasing wages, or is very limited, the increasing wages in the traded industries do not spill over into the non-traded industries because labor mobility is limited, and that has to do with the educational system. Actually, yesterday I talked to a student who was in the group last year about her master thesis, and I said, why don't you explore the extent of Balázs-Samuelson effects in Vietnam, right? Because you should expect. Vietnam has grown rapidly in the past couple of years, and you should expect the Balázs-Samuelson effect to materialize. And yeah. So the conjecture is growth is driven by technological progress in the tea sector. Growth leads to higher non-traded goods prices. Growth correlated with real appreciation. And so the Big Mac is more expensive in Basel than in Beijing because of that thing, right? So traded goods industries are more productive in Basel than they are in Beijing, and that pushes up the wage level, and the higher wage level feeds into the price of non-traded goods. So that's a story. I mean, in economics you should always have the math and the story. The math without the story is sad because you cannot communicate. The story without the math is sad because you can't be sure that you're telling the right story. So key insights is from the Balázs-Samuelson. Now, important thing is deviation from PPP, according to Balázs-Samuelson, are an equilibrium phenomenon driven by fundamental forces. So if you go to this Big Mac tables and you observe that the Big Mac is more expensive in Basel than in Beijing, Balázs-Samuelson says this does not indicate that the Swiss franc is overvalued. There is a fundamental reason why the Big Mac is more expensive, and there's in Basel than in Beijing. And the assumption underlying purchasing power parity that it should cost the same is just plain wrong, right? And that's important. So Balázs-Samuelson like a slap in the face of purchasing power parity. So the real appreciation is a byproduct of technological catch-up driven by increasing end goods prices. And here I say again, most goods are bundles of traded and non-traded components. So even if you buy a pound of coffee in a shop in Switzerland, coffee being tradable, you have that, or traded, you have that non-traded component on top of it because you buy it in a shop, and in the shop there is someone working, providing a service. So everything that you buy in a shop in Germany, Switzerland, Norway is expensive, not because the coffee is expensive, but because the person, the whole retail thing is so expensive. So as a consequence, PPP should only be used to identify over and undervaluations if differences in level of development are explicitly taken into account. And this is in fact what the economist has been doing for the last 5 years now. They said, look, we know that purchasing power parity is not, that's not the only thing we can say about the real exchange rate. And they give you GDP adjusted over and undervaluations, right? Maybe this afternoon I can show you. And that's what they refer to is essentially, they don't mention it, but they refer to Balázs-Samuelson. So let me come up with further potential drivers of fluctuations in PN over PT. Now, first of all, when you see a real appreciation, then usually central bankers get nervous. Now, when the real appreciation is due to Balázs-Samuelson, then they don't have to be nervous because basically the real appreciation is a symptom of something healthy, technological progress. That's what you want to have, right? Now, the Dutch disease is something more precarious. The Dutch disease is about you have a windfall gain in income and you want to consume both tradables and non-tradables, And since your domestic economy has to produce the non-tradables or the non-traded goods, because they're not traded, this shifts the economic structure in favor of non-traded goods. Now, why is this thing called the Dutch disease? Does anyone ever heard of it? So the story is the following. In the mid-1960s, the Netherlands discovered large supplies of natural gas in the Groningen era. Groningen is a place that's well known to Dr. Ha because he did his PhD in Groningen. So ask Dr. Ha about the Dutch disease, he will know, because Groningen is a beautiful city. I mean, it's not very far away. You can travel there from Germany. And this was the region where they discovered these natural resource supplies. Now, big celebration in the Netherlands. We are rich, right? We have, natural gas. We just have to pump it up and sell it, and we'll get money out of nothing. What happened in the Netherlands was the following. A contraction of the traded goods industries, manufacturing, an explosion of non-traded industries, an explosion, of course, of the resource processing sector. Was that good or bad? You could argue, well, it's good. It's like, if your aunt gives you whatever, $50,000, you should be happy. But suppose you get these $50,000 and you get lazy and you stop working and you're losing the habit of, working. And all of a sudden, these $50,000 are gone. You've spent them. And suppose you don't know how to work anymore. That's exactly the problem with the Dutch disease. The Dutch disease is dangerous because it's driven by something that might go away. Also, it's unhealthy because you're completely relying on one type of good. So the interesting thing is that the Dutch disease has very similar symptoms as Balasta-Samuelson. So you have output growth, but in the Dutch disease case, it's driven by the expansion of the resource sector. You have an expansion of the non-traded goods industries, and you are on very thin ice because suppose that your resources are depleted or resource prices collapse, then you're left out in the cold. Now there's millions of cases, well, millions is probably exaggerated, hundreds of cases where countries stepped into this trap. Nigeria is such a case. Azerbaijan is such a case. Kazakhstan is wisely avoiding it, and Norway is very wisely avoiding it. What does Norway do? Norway also discovered huge oil reserves offshore in the 1960s, and a country that was pretty poor up to the 1960s all of a sudden became one of the richest economies in Europe. Now, what did the Norwegian government do? They said, we don't want to fall prey to the Dutch disease, so what we do is we take the lion's share of those oil revenues and we put them into a sovereign wealth fund. Remember the balance of payments of Norway? Huge portfolio investments abroad, that's the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund. So they take away the money and put it into assets and say, look, we put this in the locker box, we don't distribute it, and we do not allow for this unhealthy development in the economy towards, usually when we talk about non-traded goods, it's not about latte macchiatos and haircuts, it's about the construction industry, right? It's a construction boom that might turn out to be unhealthy because you find out at some point that all these buildings are not actually needed. So the Dutch disease is another driver of PN over PT, and it's an unhealthy driver. So policymakers are not afraid of Balasta-Samuelson, but they're very much afraid of Dutch disease. And if there are signals of Dutch disease, they try to avoid it by, for example, setting up sovereign wealth funds. So Kazakhstan has a sovereign wealth fund now. All the Arab countries have these. Now, some countries have them, and it's just, it's taken to the side by some influential people. In Norway, it's managed by the central bank. Now, another driver of P over PT is variations in government expenditure. Now, variations in government expenditure, why? Well, because what does the government spend money on? Well, infrastructure. What is infrastructure? Well, non-traded goods. So when the government implements a high spending program like the so-called Inflation Reduction Act of Joe Biden, do expect non-traded goods prices to increase, right? That because there's huge demand for stuff that's in limited supply, and that drives up the prices. So there's various reasons why Pn over Pt might increase. Finally, variations in market power. Monopolies are like oligopolies. And now let me come back to the thing that I wanted to bring up some